You're here today to participate in a conference regarding the security in the Black Sea region. Yesterday, during the opening of this specific event, an official of the Romanian National Ministry of Defense said that actually 2/3 of the Black Sea region is dominated by Russia, especially after the annexation of Crimea. Could you give an overview of the way the situation evolved in the Black Sea region, starting with the annexation of Crimea?
Black Sea has always been challenging for NATO. It's an important flank, and security of NATO, the transatlantic community, is what matters, and the answer is it all matters because it's all part of the community. So southeastern Europe and the southern flank of NATO is just as important as the Fulda Gap was during the Cold War, or the Atlantic Ocean is in Iceland. So it all matters, right? And NATO is like a chain. It's only as strong as its weakest link, right? And so the Black Sea has always been a challenge, in part because of the treaty restrictions about the number of ships that can enter, and the number of foreign ships that can cruise, and the size of that. So it's been a challenge for really since the beginning of the Cold War, particularly when you think about the size and the number of ships that can go in there. And it is a greater challenge with Russia having more access to maritime ports and platforms that it can use to project power into the region. So not just in terms of Crimea, but also if you think in terms of the Russian expanded military presence in Syria, for example, and using that as a base to project power into the Mediterranean. So I think, quite honestly, Russia's strategy is to win without fighting. Russia's not planning on fighting World War III, but what Russia would like to do is it would like to see that it establishes its security, in a sense, by breaking up the transatlantic alliance, right? So it's always looking for opportunities, in a sense, to look for weak links in the chain. And I think one of the real opportunities they do see is on the southern flank of NATO. And so the question is how does NATO redress that balance? And so what it has to be able to do is to demonstrate that it continues to have access to the region and it can support and defend members of that region. So access to the Black Sea remains an issue of deep concern, and the ability to have capacity and capability in that region remains a concern. So it's a real challenge on how to do that, but it's, I think, part of the reason why conferences like this are so important, because that can only really happen without the cooperation of the regional partners in the region.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Russia has identified NATO as its geopolitical foe. And so NATO has to respond accordingly. And with the invasion of Ukraine, of course, not a member of NATO, there is the concern that was even a test on the part of Russia to see how the United States and other allied countries would respond. And based on how we would respond or not respond, they might think that there might be a weak will or a lack of will to respond if there was a similar invasion of a NATO ally. And so, like Jim said, conferences like this are important for transparency and for communication, to understand that NATO allies have a clear picture of the threat. And the NATO allies that are closest to the threat, closest to Russia, seem to almost always have a better picture of the threat. And so it's good to hear from the people who are here what they perceive as the threat, so that we can understand it better, we can contribute to the conversation about what we perceive, and make sure that the alliance is strong. And like Jim said too, Russia looks for soft spots and then pushes on those soft spots. And so where we can bolster those soft spots, and so they understand that there is strength of will and strength of alliance, backed by a credible hard power, military deterrence, that is the best thing that we can do to deter conflict and preserve peace.
I think that's a great point. I mean, Russia looks for weak points, and where they've pushed, NATO has pushed back. So whether it's support for the Ukraine, or reinforcing the Baltic region, or the reassurance to Central Europe, the weak spots I think people genuinely see as the Western Balkans and the Black Sea region. And so that's an area where I think NATO needs to pay more attention.
And the other point I would add too, the United States has been increasing and bolstering our military cooperation with several Eastern European countries, and frankly, there's plenty of room to grow. So we have our Aegis Ashore missile defense site with Romania and with Poland. Romania is buying many more Patriot battery systems from the United States. All of this is critically important. Russia will continue to oppose it. And one thing that I try to encourage my colleagues in the United States, as well as my colleagues from the embassies in Romania and Poland, is stay strong, because the Russians are going to oppose whatever we do to strengthen the alliance and build and deploy these defensive systems. And each country has a right to defend themselves. And so there's no reason that we shouldn't be doing things that only strengthen and protect our allies and our sovereignty.
What could Romania do in the Black Sea region to increase its presence and also not become a soft spot?
Well, you know, in the Baltic countries, one of the real concerns was air security, because the Russians would routinely test NATO by attempting overflights to challenge NATO's ability to control airspace. And the response to that was what's called the Baltic Air Policing Mission, because the Baltic countries are very small. They really can't afford to buy big air forces. And so what you have essentially is a cooperative arrangement with other members of NATO working with the Baltic countries to have a sustained air presence in the Baltic to demonstrate NATO's willingness to defend Baltic airspace. So this Baltic air policing mission has evolved over time. We have a similar activity that's evolved in Iceland, because now we're actually concerned again about Russian threats to transatlantic security in the Atlantic. And so we have a mission, because Iceland doesn't even have a military. We have a mission where we have right now 3 rotations of aircraft flying over Iceland, not just on the air policing mission, but also monitoring Russian submarine activity. So what we need in the Baltic is really a Baltic maritime policing mission of similar scope. And again, because of the limitations of passages through the Straits of Bosporus and the treaty limitations, that's really going to require the cooperation of the countries in the region and us helping them develop their capacity and capability to do that. And I think between the limited partnership of NATO and the increase in the capacity of countries in the region to participate in maritime security, NATO could demonstrate, again, its willingness to patrol and police the Black Sea. And I think that's an important development. I think Romania has actually shown some leadership in going in this direction, and I think that's eventually what will likely evolve.
I would just say Romania is doing a lot of things very, very well. One of them was that Romania stood up and wanted to take the Aegis Ashore site when the United States wanted to deploy it and needed a host country to do that. Romania knew that it would be taking on a lot of pressure from Russia and a lot of opposition from doing that, and did it anyway, and did it in the face of that. That was incredibly courageous and bold, and it was the right thing to do. And Romania has not backed down from that, and like I said, is going to be expanding some of the other military equipment that it takes. The other thing that Romania is doing very well is just fostering a closer relationship with the United States, very, very proactively, and that's a very wise thing to do as well. And the United States is making an effort there too. And then the other thing too is just public education. And this is something I think is not talked about enough. You want to make sure that the Romanian population, the people understand the threat, and they do, but you want to make sure that kind of stays at the forefront of their minds, and has this sense of desire to defend themselves and to protect their own country. I mean, all of those things, and then of course making sure that you have your own military readiness, that it's not just the military equipment that you have, that you actually have a military that's ready to fight and defend itself. All of those things project power and can just change the calculus of a force like Russia that might think it's just not worth the cost.
So, I mean, here is where I think Romania has actually been very, very smart. If you listen to the president's rhetoric, he also talks about America first. And what he means by that is the responsibility of the American president is to put first the vital interests of his country. And what's vital for the United States, we are a global power with global interests. And the key regions of the world that the United States is really concerned about, at the top of the list is Western Europe. So a vital interest of the United States for a president that's putting America first is a Western Europe that is peaceful and stable and prosperous. And so America's actually deeply committed to transatlantic security. And why that's important is that the two greatest threats to the external security of Western Europe are the destabilizing influence of Russia and the potential for problems in the Middle East to spill over into Western Europe. Well, you know, even if you had a perfect European security identity and everybody in Europe agreed that that's what's most important and that's what they needed to concentrate on, collectively, Europe doesn't have the capacity or capability to deal with either of those threats. So there is, to be honest, there is no such thing as a European security identity. There is only a transatlantic security identity in which the common security really comes from the United States, Canada, Iceland, and the European community together. That's where real security comes from. And I honestly don't think there's a strategic partner that understands that better than Romania. And they've invested in not just European security, they've invested in the transatlantic partnership. And I think that's where real security comes from.
Could you talk a little bit about the collaboration between Romania and the United States of America in terms of national security policy? Because ever since President Trump took office, he put national security first.
If you look at number one in terms of transatlantic security, what's the most important thing for the United States? And very clearly that is the success of NATO, that is the cornerstone and the bedrock of transatlantic security. This administration is completely committed to that. I think everybody realizes that by now. Romania is a firm and valued member of NATO. So in that respect, I think it's important. But beyond that, what makes NATO strong is really the contributions and the resilience of the underlying states. So those partnerships the United States values greatly. And if you look at, particularly from the U.S. perspective, about where the countries economically, strategically, philosophically that align closely. I mean, there really is this kind of arc that goes from Iceland to Great Britain through the Nordic, Baltic, Central European states, anchoring in Southern Europe, that are the countries that the United States does kind of look to as its kind of natural partners who kind of see the world the way the United States does. I think Romania is part of that. We work a lot with the embassy communities in Washington, D.C. The Romanian embassy, I think, represents their country very, very well. And they're a very kind of vibrant part of making the case that there is common cause between the United States and Romania. So it's one of the more vibrant bilateral partnerships.
Yeah, I just want to underscore that. I'm a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. Jim's at the Heritage Foundation, and the Romanian embassy is one of the strongest partnerships that I have in terms of sharing information, having a friendly relationship, seeing the threats the same way, and really having a common understanding of what's necessary to deter threats. I think a lot of people misunderstand our president as saying that, when it comes to NATO, that he's just looking for money that comes out of NATO, but really there's an underlying reason for that, and he wants these individual sovereign nations to step up and participate in the collective security of the group, of the alliance. Romania has done that, and Romania is doing that and continues to contribute what's necessary, and continues to share the burdens in other ways militarily. And so they're definitely with us there. But it's more than that. There are other opportunities in which again, like Jim said, the alliance is more than a military alliance, also a political alliance. And so this alliance is there because of originally a shared view of the world, of principles that we care about, of human rights and pluralism and just societies, respecting what we call international norms, treaties and agreements, recognize national borders and the sovereignty of nations. All of which Russia does not recognize and doesn't understand and doesn't play by those rules. Romania has demonstrated that it is a good friend when it comes to those principles and ideas.